Danny Reyes had shown 400 people to their seats that night, and not one of them sat in row C. By the third song, he understood that nobody was going to. Las Vegas, Nevada, the Las Vegas Hilton showroom, November 1978. The night Ann-Margret sang to 8 empty chairs, and the whole room found out why before it ended. Danny was 19, second week on the job. He had a flashlight, a stack of ticket stubs, and a rule his manager gave him on day one. Never ask questions about a hold ticket. Row C, table 9, house left. 8 seats. Reserved every single show, paid in cash, no name on the ledger. He had been told to keep his hands off it and his mouth shut. He hadn't planned on breaking either rule tonight. 3 days earlier, an old man named Saul Abramson had died in his sleep in a one-bedroom apartment 4 miles off the Strip, and nobody at the Hilton showroom knew it yet, except the one man who would decide, hours before curtain, that the seats stayed exactly where they were. Saul Abramson had been buying those 8 seats every week for 11 years. Walter Klein, the showroom manager, had inherited the arrangement from the man before him, who'd inherited it from the man before that. Table 9, row C, cash every Monday, Walter told Danny during his first shift, tapping the reservation book like it was scripture. Mr. Abramson, older gentleman, comes alone. Doesn't want help, doesn't want questions. He buys 8 seats and sits by himself? Every week, 11 years. Walter closed the book. Not our business, why? Danny watched him the following Monday from the back of the room. Saul was a small man in a gray suit that had gone shiny at the elbows, and before the lights dimmed, he did something Danny had never seen a customer do. He laid out 7 folded cocktail napkins across the empty seats beside him, 1 per chair, and set a name on each one in careful pencil. Then he sat down in the 8th seat, straightened his jacket, and watched the stage like the rest of the row was full. Danny asked Evelyn Marsh about it. She'd worked the floor 8 years, longer than anyone but Walter. "Big band," Evie said, not looking up from her tray. "Saul played trumpet with an outfit that toured the circuit back in the 40s and 50s. 7 other guys. They used to come to shows together after they stopped playing. Every act that came through town, they'd take a table, 8 of them, loud as anything." She started counting glasses. "They started dying off one at a time. Saul just kept buying the table." "For guys who were gone?" "He told me once it wasn't for them. It was so the room never looked like it forgot them." She finally looked at him. "Don't ask him about it, Danny. He doesn't like to explain it. He just likes the seats held." By Danny's 4th week, he'd stopped needing an explanation. He watched for Saul the way you watch for weather. Every Monday, same gray suit, same 7 napkins, same careful pencil. Danny memorized 2 of the names without meaning to: Buddy Katz, second trumpet, and Marv Ostrowski, drums, because Saul said them under his breath sometimes, like a roll call, before the lights went down. One night in October, Danny worked up the nerve to bring Saul his usual ginger ale without being asked. "You're new," Saul said. It wasn't a question. 2 months, sir." Saul studied him a second, then nodded at the empty chair beside his. "Sit a minute. Nobody's using it tonight either." Danny didn't sit. He wasn't allowed to. But he stayed by the table while Saul talked, low and unhurried, about a ballroom in Cicero, Illinois in 1951. 8 kids from the neighborhood with borrowed horns and a drum kit held together with tape. "We weren't any good for the first 2 years," Saul said. "Then we were pretty good for about 15. He tapped Buddy Katz's napkin. "This one could hit a high C that'd take the paint off the wall." He smiled at that, briefly, and then didn't say anything else for a while. "Why do you keep buying all 8, Mr. Abramson?" Saul thought about it longer than Danny expected. "Because the day I stop," he said, "is the day they're really gone. Right now, once a week, this room still has all 8 of us in it." He looked toward the stage, where the crew was setting up for the second show. "I'm not sentimental, kid. I just don't like empty rooms." He never mentioned it again after that. But Danny noticed something new the following week. Saul had started nodding, just slightly, toward the stage during Ann-Margret's numbers, as if he were introducing the band to her one more time from the audience. The Monday Saul Abramson didn't show, Danny didn't think much of it. People missed a week sometimes. The Monday after that, Walter Klein got a phone call from a niece in Henderson, going through Saul's address book because somebody had to. She was polite and brief, and asked if there was a refund owed on a standing table reservation. Walter said he'd look into it, and hung up, and then sat very still at his desk for a long moment. By showtime that night, word had moved through the floor staff the way it does, fast and quiet, and wrong in a few of the details. What was not wrong was the ledger entry Walter now had to deal with. Row C, Table 9, paid through the following month, no name left to hold it for. The pressure started an hour before doors. A party of 6 from a high roller suite wanted the section. A floor host had already half promised it to smooth over a comped room dispute. The maitre d' pushed Walter twice. "It's 8 open seats on a sold-out night, Walt. Nobody's sitting there. Fill it." "It's held," Walter said. "Held by who? The man's dead." Walter didn't have an answer for that. He had a decision to make with 20 minutes left before curtain, a casino host leaning on him, and a dead man's table that suddenly belonged to nobody, or to 11 years of Mondays that nobody upstairs had ever paid attention to. He did the only thing he could think of. He walked backstage and asked to speak to Roger Smith. Roger Smith listened to the whole thing standing in the hallway outside his wife's dressing room, arms crossed, saying nothing until Walter finished. 8 seats, Roger said. 11 years. Yes, sir. And he named them, after the men. Every week, Mr. Smith. Folded napkins, pencil, same names. Roger looked at the dressing room door, then back at Walter. "Give me a minute." He knocked once and went in. Danny, sent to relay a message about the seating dispute, stood close enough to the door to hear most of it, the low rise and fall of Roger's voice explaining it, and then Ann-Margret's voice, quieter, asking a single question Danny would remember for the rest of his life. "Did he ever miss a Monday?" "Not once, until this one," Roger said. There was a pause long enough that Danny thought the conversation was over. "Hold the table," she said. "All 8. Nobody sits there tonight." Another pause. "And get me the names." Walter didn't ask how she meant to use them. He went back to the maitre d' and told the high roller party they'd be seated elsewhere. No discussion. The host wasn't happy. Walter didn't care. At 2 minutes to curtain, Danny watched a stagehand carry a small reading lamp, the kind used backstage for script pages, out to table 9 and set it in the center, low and warm, throwing just enough light across the 8 empty chairs that they weren't sitting in the dark like the rest of the room once the house lights dropped. The first half of the show ran the way it always did. Full band, full voice, full house on its feet twice already. Danny worked the aisle and kept glancing at table 9, lit and empty, and told himself it didn't mean what he thought it meant. Then, near the middle of the set, the orchestra dropped without warning into something slower, older. A number Danny didn't recognize, the kind his grandfather might have known, brass-heavy, unhurried, from another decade entirely. The crowd, mid-applause from the last number, went quiet trying to figure out the shift. Ann-Margret walked to the front edge of the stage, past her mark, closer to house left than Danny had ever seen her stand. She looked directly at table 9. "This one's a request," she said into the microphone, and nothing else. No explanation, no name. She sang it facing that table for almost the entire number, not the crowd, not the cameras, the empty chairs under the small, warm lamp. Danny watched people near the front start to notice, craning to see what she was looking at, murmuring to each other. By the second verse, most of the room had turned to look too. When the song ended, she didn't announce anything. She simply said, "Thank you, gentlemen," toward the table, and the orchestra rolled straight into the next number like nothing had happened. It took less than a minute for the story to move through the room in whispers, a waitress here, a captain there, until most of the 1,600 people in that showroom understood, in fragments, what they'd just watched. A trumpet player, 11 years, 8 seats, 7 names, and 1 seat that, for the first time in over a decade, nobody was sitting in either. Danny didn't cry easily. He cried that night, standing against the back wall with an empty tray in his hands. The seats stayed lit for both shows that night, and were never sold again for the remainder of that engagement. On the last night of the run, Walter quietly folded up the reservation card for table 9 and put it in the bottom drawer of his desk instead of the trash. Danny asked him once, years later, what happened to the 7 napkins Saul used to leave behind every week. "His niece came by the box office asking after his things," Walter said. "I gave her the reservation card, told her what I knew. She cried right there at the window." He shrugged, the way people do when they've carried something a long time and are still deciding how much of it to hand over. "Far as the napkins, Saul kept his own, always took them home in his coat pocket at the end of the night. There was a box of them at his apartment, 11 years' worth, every Monday, same 7 names written out fresh each time so the pencil wouldn't fade." Ann-Margret never spoke about it publicly. It wasn't in any program, any press release, any interview. The only record that existed for years was in the memory of a handful of showroom staff and one usher who had been on the floor for exactly 2 months when it happened. Danny Reyes worked the Las Vegas Hilton showroom for 6 more years before he moved into hotel management himself, and he trained a lot of new ushers over the decades that followed. He told most of them the same thing on their first night, the way Walter had told him. "Table 9, row C. If you ever get a hold ticket with no name on it," he'd say, "you leave it alone. You don't ask why. Somebody upstairs already knows." None of the new hires ever had a hold ticket like that. The arrangement had ended with Saul, and nobody replaced it. But Danny kept saying it anyway, every year, to whoever was new. It had become less of an instruction and more of a way of keeping the story alive, the same way Saul used to keep a table lit for 7 men who couldn't fill it themselves. In 1994, cleaning out a storage room slated for renovation, hotel staff found a box of Hilton showroom stationery that had belonged to Walter Klein, who'd retired the year before. Inside, along with old seating charts and staff schedules, was a single reservation card, yellowed at the corners. Table 9, row C, 8 seats, standing hold, cash. S. Abramson. Someone almost threw it out with the rest. Danny, by then a floor director himself, asked to keep it instead. He kept it in his desk for the rest of his career, in the same bottom drawer Walter once used, and never explained it to anyone who didn't already know the story. Some things, he'd come to believe, weren't meant to be performed twice. They were meant to be held, quietly, faithfully, the way a woman on a stage once held a room's memory for 8 men she had never met, for the length of exactly 1 song, and asked nothing in return. If a small kindness like this one ever stayed with you longer than you expected, take a moment to subscribe and leave a like so these forgotten moments keep finding you. And tell us in the comments, have you ever kept a seat, a chair, or a place at the table for someone who was gone?